This story is a fictional narrative created solely for entertainment purposes. It does not depict real people, real events, or any official military action. The morning of my officer pinning at Fort Moore in Columbus, Georgia, felt like a turning point in my life, the kind of moment I once believed would lift every weight off my shoulders. The air inside Hurley Hill Hall buzzed with a mix of pride ceremony and expectation. Rows of families filled the seats. Service members stood in pressed uniforms. Cadets whispered their excitement as each name echoed from the loudspeakers. When the announcer called Officer Candidate Brooke Callahan, my heart slammed against my ribs. I had survived months of OCS training and years of turbulence at home. I told myself that this day would finally belong to me. I took my first step toward the stage, and the hall seemed to glow under the lights. I tried to focus on the polished floor, the quiet hum of the crowd, and the pride rising in my chest. For a moment, I believed nothing and no one could spoil it. That illusion shattered the instant I saw my stepmother Linda rise from her seat. Her face was pale with anger, and her jaw twisted in the familiar shape of contempt I had lived with for years. She moved out of the aisle with sudden force, her heels striking the floor as if she were marching toward a battlefield. I barely had time to inhale before her voice tore across the hall. "You do not deserve this!" The room froze. Eyes shifted toward her and then toward me. Before I could react, Linda closed the distance between us. Her hand flew upward and cracked against my cheek with a sound so sharp it cut through the entire ceremony. Gasps burst across the hall as if hundreds of lungs expelled disbelief at the same time. My vision trembled, my ears rang. The sting on my face spread downward like fire, yet I forced my shoulders to lock into position. Every ounce of training demanded that I maintain military bearing, even as humiliation swelled inside me. I tasted fear and shame, and something darker, the sudden certainty that this moment would follow me far beyond Fort Moore. Silence fell again, heavy and stunned. Then a single chair scraped loudly across the floor. Major General Robert Hampton turned in his seat, his expression carved in a furious disbelief I had never seen from a senior officer. He stood without hesitation, his voice erupting through the hall with the authority of a man who had commanded thousands. "Ma'am, step away now. This ceremony will not be destroyed." His command cut through the air with absolute force. Two military police officers pushed forward, their footsteps fast and deliberate. The crowd did not dare whisper. My cheeks still burned. My hands shook at my sides. My heart felt split between pride and disgrace as I watched the scene unfold. I had imagined tears of joy on this day, not the echo of a slap or the glare of hundreds of witnesses. And as Linda shouted something I could no longer hear, drowned beneath the rising storm of voices and movement, one question rose in my mind like smoke. What could make a two-star general react with such fury? And what kind of hatred drove my stepmother to strike me in front of the entire hall? If this moment shocked you, let me know where you are watching from, because this was only the beginning of what unfolded next. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in a small house shaded by old oak trees and the kind of warm, humid air that clings to your skin even at dusk. People often say Savannah is beautiful because of the cobblestone streets, the Spanish moss, and the slow, gentle rhythm of the river. But beauty feels different when the place you live in slowly squeezes the confidence out of you. My earliest memories were quiet ones, long afternoons with my mother, who had a soft voice and an easy laugh and a way of making every heavy thing feel lighter. She died when I was 12 after a sudden illness that took her faster than anyone expected. Losing her felt like the world had tilted and left me sliding toward a darkness I could not stop. For a while, it was just me and my father, Patrick Callahan. He had served in the National Guard years before, but he was never the kind of man who stood his ground. He avoided conflict the way some people avoid thunderstorms. If a fight was coming, he found the nearest exit and escaped. I used to think it was gentleness, but with time I understood it was fear. When he met Linda, everything changed. She appeared in our lives when I was 13, with carefully styled hair, sharp eyes, and a voice that filled a room faster than her footsteps. She moved into our house within months, and with her came an entirely new set of rules, none of which were spoken, but all of which were enforced. Linda had a son, Evan, 2 years older than me, and from the start, he became the son around which everything in the house revolved. My father acted as if Evan were made of glass, always praising every small achievement, always bending to keep him comfortable. Linda encouraged it, smiling proudly whenever Evan stretched out on the couch while I cleaned up after dinner. She told anyone who would listen that Evan was born to lead, while I should learn how to stay out of the way. It was a strange thing to realize at 14 that you had become a guest in your own home. It began with small remarks. Linda would glance at me and frown as if something about me offended her. "Are you really wearing that? Your hair looks messy. You should try harder if you want people to take you seriously." At first, I tried to fix everything she pointed out. I adjusted my clothes, changed my hair, sat with my back straighter. But every correction only invited another. Evan, on the other hand, could do no wrong. If he skipped homework, Linda praised him for being creative. If he broke something, she insisted it was my fault for distracting him. The imbalance in the house grew like an unseen weight pressing down on my chest each day. When I invited friends over, Linda would intercept them at the door, telling them I was busy or that the house was not suitable for visitors. Some of my friends stopped trying. Others whispered that my stepmother did not like them. Eventually, the invitations dried up and the house grew quieter. I felt myself shrinking into the corners of rooms, hoping Linda would forget I existed. But she never did. She found ways to remind me that I was the outsider. She once referred to me as the charity case while talking on the phone, believing I could not hear her. Another time, she accused me of lying about a school project and insisted that I apologize for trying to gain sympathy. She had a talent for gaslighting small distortions repeated until even I began questioning my own memory. My father rarely intervened. If I told him Linda had shouted at me, he said she was tired. If I insisted she lied about something, he rubbed his temples and begged me not to start trouble. He chose peace over truth, and he chose Linda over me. The breaking point came when I was 15. I had saved money for months doing odd chores, hoping to buy a new pair of running shoes for track tryouts. When the box finally arrived, I opened it with more excitement than I had felt in years. Linda walked in, saw the shoes, and smirked. "So you think buying these makes you special?" Before I could reply, she took them from my hands and hid them in her closet, telling me that privileges had to be earned and I was not ready for them. I cried in my room that night, feeling the familiar ache of being unseen. I decided then that I would learn to keep everything important inside my own mind where Linda could not reach it. I began to live in silence, handling chores without complaint, avoiding conflict, absorbing insults, as if my skin had grown thicker. Yet the truth was the opposite. Every word she spoke found a place inside me and settled like dust in a house no one cleaned. By the time I turned 17, I believed completely that I was never good enough. If I scored high in school, Linda said it was luck. If I worked hard, she said I was trying to show off. If I tried to stand up for myself, she twisted my words until I felt foolish for even trying. Evan, meanwhile, received praise for simply existing. It was favoritism so obvious it should have angered my father, yet he stood by quietly day after day, pretending not to notice. I learned to lower my voice, minimize my needs, and disappear in my own home. But even then, a small part of me, a stubborn sliver my mother had nurtured long ago, whispered that the world had to be bigger than the walls of that house. I only needed the courage to walk beyond them. Have you ever seen someone bullied inside their own family? Tell me your thoughts. I used to think that escaping my house in Savannah would require some dramatic act of rebellion, but in the end, it was something much quieter, the slow realization that if I stayed any longer, I would lose every piece of myself that still felt real. By the time I finished high school, I had become so used to shrinking around Linda and Evan that silence felt like the only safe language. Yet inside me, a different voice kept pushing against the walls. They built the voice my mother had left behind, the one that whispered, "There is more than this." I did not know what more meant until a guidance counselor mentioned the University of Georgia ROTC program. At first, I brushed it off. Military service sounded like something meant for people stronger than me, people who had confidence I had never tasted. But the longer I sat with the idea, the more it grew into something solid, something like purpose. The military offered structure, something my home had never given me. It offered discipline, growth, and belonging. I wanted all of that desperately. I wanted an identity that was mine, not the one carved out by Linda or erased by my father. When I applied and received a partial scholarship, I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, gripping the acceptance letter with trembling hands. It felt like a door cracking open. Linda saw the letter and laughed a sharp, brittle sound that sliced the air. "The military is not for someone like you," she said. "You crumble too easily." Evan burst into laughter behind her as if her words were the punchline of a joke he had heard before. My father did not say anything. He just looked away like he always did. I packed my bags for UGA without waiting for approval. Leaving that house felt like stepping out of a storm shelter after years of thunder. I did not know if I would thrive in ROTC, but for the first time in forever, I felt motion instead of paralysis. College life brought challenges, but for once the challenges made sense. Early morning physical training, leadership labs, uniform inspections, long nights balancing classes and military science. None of it scared me. In fact, it felt like breathing clean air after living in a room full of smoke. My instructors noticed how hard I worked, probably because I pushed myself far more than necessary. Every time Linda called to remind me that I would fail, I pushed harder. Every time my father forgot my birthday or skipped visiting me, I doubled my study hours. I graduated near the top of my ROTC class, but no one from my family attended the ceremony. I scanned the rows of families cheering for their cadets and realized mine had not even bothered to acknowledge the day. The emptiness stung. Yet beneath it was something else, a rising certainty that the life I wanted would never connect to the life I was born into. The next step felt natural. I applied for officer candidate school at Fort Moore in Columbus, Georgia. OCS was known for breaking down even the strongest candidates, but instead of fear, I felt a strange spark, a determination that made my hands steady as I completed the paperwork. When the acceptance email arrived, I stared at it until my eyes blurred. OCS meant transformation. It meant proving to myself, not to Linda, not to Evan, not even to my father, but to me that I was capable of becoming someone I respected. I made the mistake of calling home to share the news. Linda answered and sighed loudly as if my voice had already inconvenienced her. "So you really think you can handle that?" she said. "Rux marches yelling all day, being told what to do. You are not built for that world." Before I could answer, Evan grabbed the phone. "Hey, Brooke, did you forget Mom needs money for groceries?" he said, laughing. "You know, since you are such a big future officer now." I hung up before the anger rising in my throat could twist into words. It was not just the insults, it was the hypocrisy. Evan never paid for anything. He received a used car for his 17th birthday and a newer one a year later. His college tuition was covered completely, and when he wanted to move into an apartment, my father wrote the deposit check without hesitation. Meanwhile, I had not received even $20 a month during college. My father always claimed money was tight right after transferring funds to Evan. The favoritism was an old wound, but each year it reopened as if Linda carved it deeper with intention. When I left for Fort Moore in February 2024, I packed everything I owned into a single duffel bag. Before walking out the door, I paused for a moment, expecting someone to stop me or wish me luck. But the house was quiet. Evan was out. My father was in the garage sorting old tools. Linda watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, lips curled. "Do not embarrass yourself," she said. It was the closest thing to a farewell I received. As I stepped into the cold morning air, something loosened inside me. For the first time, I felt the weight of my home slipping off my shoulders. I did not know what waited for me at OCS, but I knew one thing clearly. I would not let the people who tried to break me decide who I became. I would find honor and identity on my own terms, one step at a time, even if the world I came from refused to believe in me. I arrived at Fort Moore in February 2024, carrying one duffel bag and a determination so tightly wound inside my chest that it felt like part of my rib cage. The first morning of officer candidate school began before sunrise with a whistle blast that sliced through the cold air. I stood in formation, half awake, half terrified, and fully aware that whatever strength I thought I had was about to be tested in ways I could not yet imagine. OCS was not designed to build you up gently. It stripped you down first, exposing every weakness, every hesitation, every moment of doubt. Then slowly, day by day, it rebuilt you into something sharper, something steadier, something capable of leading others. The pace was relentless. Our first week included land navigation exercises where we spent hours moving through thick Georgia woods with a compass, a map, and the pressure of knowing that being even a few degrees off could leave you wandering in circles. My boots sank into mud with every step, and sweat dripped into my eyes long before the sun reached its peak. Yet when I plotted my final point correctly and reached the rally area ahead of schedule, I felt a strange surge of pride, the kind that reminded me why I had chosen this path. The ruck marches were even harder. We started with shorter distances, but soon worked our way toward the brutal 12-mile march that everyone whispered about with a mix of dread and respect. The weight of the ruck pulled against my shoulders and dug into my hips until both areas burned with each step. My breath fogged the morning air, and my legs threatened to fold beneath me more than once. But quitting was never an option, not after everything I had survived at home. Each mile felt like another step away from Linda, another inch of space between me and the person she insisted I could never become. Our leadership lanes came next, a series of tactical challenges where each candidate had to step forward and direct a team under pressure. It felt like the purest test of who you were when fatigue and doubt blurred your instincts. When my turn came, I felt fear claw at my stomach, but I forced myself to speak clearly, delegate tasks, and keep the team moving. I made mistakes, but I learned faster than I expected. It surprised me to notice that some candidates who had arrived with loud confidence struggled while I found a quiet steadiness inside myself. It also surprised Sergeant First Class Medina, who watched us with the calm intensity of someone who could read a person before they even opened their mouth. He was the kind of instructor who did not raise his voice unless necessary, and when he did, everyone listened. One morning, after a difficult lane, he pulled me aside. "Candidate Callahan," he said, "your form is clean and your decision-making improves each time, and you do not crack under pressure. That last part matters more than you think." His words settled into me like an anchor. It was the first time in years someone recognized strength in me rather than dismissing it. It gave me momentum during the grueling weeks that followed, but not everything grew easier. During a conditioning drill, I landed wrong on a wet patch of grass and twisted my ankle. The pain shot upward and my knee buckled, but I bit down on it, refusing to fall. Later at the medical tent, the specialist said it was a mild sprain and recommended rest. Rest felt like a foreign language. Falling behind meant risking my place, and I refused to give Linda the satisfaction of being right. So I wrapped my ankle, carefully iced it when I could, and pushed through the pain. Each step hurt, but each step also felt like defiance, a quiet rebellion against every voice that had told me I was weak. While my days at OCS were grueling, the nights brought a different kind of battle. My phone buzzed with messages from Linda nearly every evening. "You will quit soon. You always do. The military will chew you up. Evan says you look ridiculous in uniform." Sometimes the messages came while I sat on my bunk cleaning my gear or memorizing procedures. They struck without warning, reopening wounds that training had pushed to the background. I tried not to read them, but curiosity and old fear pulled me in every time. Her words burrowed into my thoughts and waited for the moments when exhaustion dragged my guard down. But unlike before, I felt something shift inside me. Instead of swallowing her cruelty, I found myself pushing harder the next morning. Every insult became fuel. Every doubt she threw at me became a reminder of why I was here. I was not just training to be an officer. I was training to become someone she no longer had power over. SFC Medina noticed the change, even if I never said a word. During a break after a long run, he glanced at me and said some candidates come here trying to protect a strong reputation they already have. Others come here trying to build one. You are building one, Callahan, and that kind of grit is rare. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, yet it carried weight. It sparked the beginning of something unmistakable, an underdog rising arc I never expected to live inside. I was not the fastest or the strongest or the loudest, but I kept showing up. I kept pushing. I kept refusing to break. And each day I felt the gap widen between the girl who once hid in her own home and the woman who now carried a ruck on her back and led teams through gauntlets of mud sweat and pressure. For the first time in my life, I understood that resilience could be a kind of quiet power, and I felt it growing inside me with every challenge OCS threw my way. The final weeks of OCS felt like standing on the edge of a long climb, looking down at every mile I had survived and up at the final stretch that would determine whether everything I had fought for would mean something. We were close to graduation, close to the pinning ceremony that marked the moment we stepped from candidates into officers. The instructors reminded us that tradition required sending formal invitations to our families. For many candidates, this was exciting, something they spoke about with pride during meals and breaks. For me, it felt like a weight pressing against my ribs. I knew that skipping the invitation would raise questions and probably disciplinary concern. The ceremony was meant to honor the families who supported us, even if mine had never played that role. I stared at the blank invitation form for nearly an hour, trying to convince myself that maybe this time things would be different. Maybe they would simply show up quietly, sit in the audience, and allow me one moment of peace. But I knew my family too well. Even so, the expectation was firm, and I had learned enough about military customs to know that refusing was not an option. I filled out the form with shaking hands and sent a message to my father, letting him know the date and time. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine he might be proud of me. That fantasy lasted less than a minute. My phone buzzed and Linda's name flashed on the screen. "So you expect me to buy plane tickets and a hotel for myself and Evan? Do you think we have money to waste on your little ceremony?" I exhaled slowly, knowing what was coming next. I replied that OCS candidates were not provided extra funds for family attendance, and that I could not afford to pay for her and Evan. The response came instantly, like an arrow fired from the shadows. "Of course you cannot afford it. You think pinning makes you special, but you only got this far by luck, not skill. You should be grateful we even consider attending." My stomach tightened. I tried reasoning with her, explaining that the ceremony was important to me and that I hoped they could come if possible. Another message appeared. "If you expect us to participate, you will pay for everything. Tickets, food, hotel, and transportation. Otherwise, forget it." I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion of the day press down. 12 hours earlier, I had completed a leadership lane that left my muscles trembling. Yet somehow, Linda's words cut deeper than any physical strain. I typed carefully, choosing my words. "I cannot pay for that." Then the explosion came exactly the way I expected, but still sharp enough to wound. "You are pathetic. You only get pinned because the instructors feel sorry for you. Do not act like you earned anything." My fingers froze above the screen. It was the same attack she had used my entire life, stripping away my achievements before I could even celebrate them. Still, part of me hoped my father would intervene. He finally replied after hours of silence. "Brooke, maybe you could try to work something out. Your stepmother has a point. It costs a lot to travel." His words hit harder than Linda's because they exposed what I had always known but tried to deny. My father would not stand up for me. Not now, not ever. The betrayal settled over me like a cold fog. Even after months at OCS pushing through pain and exhaustion, even after earning recognition from SFC Medina, and making it through every test, I still felt like that forgotten girl in Savannah fighting for scraps of validation. I stared at the thread of messages, feeling the familiar mix of anger and grief rising beneath my skin. For a moment, I considered disinviting them altogether, but that would violate expectations and possibly reflect poorly on me. The ceremony required formality and respect no matter who sat in the seats. So I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and sent the invitation anyway, knowing what would come. Training continued, but my mind stayed clouded. During runs through the humid Georgia trails, I replayed Linda's voice telling me I had no skill. During drills, I remembered my father standing behind her, never beside me. I tried to shake it off, reminding myself that graduation was my moment, not theirs. But family wounds have long roots, and they tug even when you think you have outrun them. A few days later, Linda sent another message. "Fine, we will come, but do not expect anything from us. We will sit where we want. We will leave when we want. Do not embarrass us. Embarrass them." The irony made my chest twist. I typed a short reply. "Attendance is optional. You can do whatever you choose." She answered with a single line that felt like a threat. "Oh, we will be there. You better not make a fool of yourself." I set the phone down and stared at my reflection in the window of the barracks. For months, I had fought through pain, doubt, and exhaustion to stand here. I wanted this ceremony to reflect what I had earned. Instead, I had the sinking certainty that trouble was coming. I felt it in my bones the way people feel a storm before it breaks. I knew my family well enough to understand they never arrived anywhere without bringing chaos in their wake. And even though I tried to prepare myself, nothing could have warned me for what would unfold on the day that was supposed to mark the beginning of my new life. The morning of my officer pinning arrived with a brightness that felt almost cruel. The Georgia sun was sharp against the parade fields as I walked toward Hurley Hill Hall, my throat tight with the kind of tension that presses harder the closer you get to something important. My uniform was pressed perfectly, my boots polished until they reflected light in small flashes, but none of it settled my nerves. It was not the ceremony that frightened me. It was the knowledge that my family was somewhere in the building waiting. Every candidate had been reminded that the day was meant to symbolize pride unity and the beginning of a new chapter. For everyone else, the air seemed full of excitement, families waving, greeting each other, filling the hall with a joyful hum. But as I stepped inside, all of that sound blurred into a low rush beneath my heartbeat. The hall was crowded rows of chairs filled with parents, grandparents, siblings, children, all dressed neatly for the occasion. The stage was decorated with simple banners, and the American flag hung steady at the front. Officers in their dress uniforms stood along the aisle, speaking quietly as candidates filed toward their designated positions. I scanned the room looking for my family, even though part of me wished I would not find them. Then I saw Linda. She sat upright in her chair, one leg crossed over the other, her posture stiff, her expression cut from cold stone. Her eyes locked onto me the moment I turned her way. There was no warmth, no hint of pride, not even neutrality. Instead, she wore the same expression she had used countless times at home, an expression that said she was waiting for me to fail so she could confirm what she already believed. Evan sat beside her holding his phone up at an angle, delivering a live stream commentary to whoever followed him online. When he noticed me looking, his grin widened. "Showing Mom how you embarrass yourself," he mouthed with exaggerated clarity as if it were some kind of joke. My stomach tightened. I forced myself to look away, reminding myself that today was not about them, no matter how hard they tried to twist it. Still, the weight of their presence pressed against me like a hand on my shoulder, pushing down relentlessly. As I stood with my platoon waiting for the ceremony to begin, I felt the hall vibrate with the movement of families settling in chairs, officers whispering final cues, and candidates adjusting their uniforms. The air held a mix of cologne perfume and the faint scent of polished wood. Instructors moved along the rows, giving last-minute reminders to maintain bearing and composure. I nodded along, but felt my attention keep drifting back toward the front row where Linda and Evan sat. I caught the moment when Major General Robert Hampton shifted his gaze across the room. He was seated at the front near the podium, his presence unmistakable with the crisp stars on his shoulder boards. His eyes were steady alert, taking in everything with a practiced awareness. When his gaze swept over my family, I noticed a small change in his expression, something like curiosity, but edged sharp enough to signal concern. It was only a second, but it stayed with me longer than it should have. The ceremony began with the national anthem echoing through the hall. I kept my posture straight, eyes forward, jaw tight. The music should have lifted me, given me the pride everyone around me seemed to feel. Instead, I fought the growing pressure in my chest, the knowledge that Linda's stare was burning holes in the side of my face. When the opening remarks ended, the announcer stepped forward and began calling names one by one. Each candidate walked onto the stage, received their rank pinned by loved ones, and returned to their seats while cheers filled the hall. I watched quietly, waiting for my turn, trying not to imagine what expression Linda wore with each name that was not mine. Would she be annoyed that the ceremony was taking too long for her liking? Would Evan be whispering snide comments into his phone? Every possibility gnawed at me. At one point, when the hall quieted, I heard Linda's voice cut through the subtle murmurs, a sharp, irritated sigh, as if the entire event existed solely to inconvenience her. The candidate beside me whispered good luck under their breath. I nodded silently, unsure if luck would be enough. When the announcer paused to shuffle his papers, the hall seemed to hold its breath. My turn was approaching, and the rising pressure inside me felt like the tightening of a rope around my ribs. I inhaled slowly, trying to ground myself in the moment. The warm glow of the overhead lights, the shimmering reflections from polished metals, the soft shuffling of uniforms. But in the corner of my vision, I saw Evan lift his phone again, angling it directly at the stage, as if preparing to film something he expected to be dramatic. His grin told me he was not there to support me. He was there to witness something he hoped would go wrong. My hands tingled with adrenaline. I felt the tremor begin in my fingers and forced them still. I reminded myself of every ruck march, every land navigation point, every leadership lane I had completed. I reminded myself that I had earned this moment through grit, not luck. Yet no matter how deeply I breathed, I could not ignore the awareness that trouble was coming. I felt it like heat rising beneath a sealed lid. Even before my name was called, the emotional temperature in the room began to shift. It was subtle at first, a tightening of attention, a faint ripple of energy moving through those seated near the aisle where my family sat. I saw Major General Hampton glance again in their direction, his gaze narrowing ever so slightly as if he sensed the disturbance before it broke. Then the announcer spoke my name. Officer Candidate Brooke Callahan. My heart punched against my ribs. I stepped forward, knowing the pressure had reached its peak, and knowing with equal certainty that whatever happened next would mark me forever. The moment my name echoed through Hurley Hill Hall, something inside me tightened so sharply it felt like a physical pull drawing me toward the stage and toward the future I had fought for with every blistered mile and sleepless night of OCS. I stepped forward, hearing the soft rhythm of my boots on the polished floor and trying to anchor myself in that sound to stay calm, to stay focused. The lights seemed brighter than before, casting long reflections across the flag at the front of the room. The hall was silent in that ceremonial way silence becomes a feeling instead of an absence. For a split second, I thought maybe, just maybe, the tension swirling around my family would fade into the background and the moment would unfold the way I had imagined it so many times. But the hope lasted only until I reached the front row. Linda rose from her seat so abruptly that the chair legs screeched against the floor. Her face was twisted with a fury that felt almost unreal in such a dignified place. I saw the movement before I heard her voice, and when she shouted, the sound exploded across the hall like a crack in glass. "My son Evan deserves this more than you. You stole his chance." Every head in the hall turned. I froze mid-step, unable to comprehend how quickly the ceremony had shattered. The air shifted from reverent to shocked in an instant as dozens of eyes locked onto her and then onto me. I tried to speak, to calm her, to say something, anything, but my throat tightened and no words came out. Linda stepped closer, her shoes striking the floor in sharp, impatient taps. Before I could blink, her hand swung upward and came down with a force that made the room spin. The slap echoed louder than her scream, louder than anything I had ever heard inside a military hall. A hot sting burst across my cheek, and my ears rang as if the sound itself had struck me. For a split second, I thought I might fall. Gasps rippled through the rows, rising in waves of disbelief and outrage. A woman somewhere near the back whispered, "Oh, my goodness," under her breath, but even that small sound felt too loud in the stunned stillness. Evan lifted his phone higher, grinning as he continued recording, clearly thrilled with the chaos unfolding in front of him. He pointed the camera at my face as if he were capturing something amusing instead of something cruel. "Show Mom how ridiculous she looks," he said with a laugh he did not bother to hide. Shame washed over me so sharply it almost stole my breath. My eyes burned, but I forced myself not to cry. Not here, not now. I locked my shoulders into position, refusing to break stance even as my vision blurred for a second. I could feel every emotion rising at once. Humiliation, anger, shock, disbelief, and beneath it all, an old familiar ache. The same one I used to feel in Savannah in the hallway of my childhood home whenever Linda decided to remind me of what she thought I was. Only this time, the entire hall was watching. The whispering grew louder as people leaned toward each other, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Some covered their mouths. Some stared at Linda as if she had committed an unthinkable offense. Others looked at me with sympathy I could barely stand to receive. My cheek throbbed with each heartbeat. Then a voice cut through the chaos so forcefully it stilled the entire room. "Ma'am, step back immediately!" I turned my head just enough to see Major General Hampton rising from his seat, his jaw set, his posture rigid with the unmistakable authority of someone who would not tolerate another second of what had just happened. His voice carried like a command rolling across every corner of the hall, leaving no space for argument. "This ceremony will not be disrupted. Step away now." The shift in the room was instant, palpable, like a gust of wind after a storm breaks. Two military police officers moved down the aisle without hesitation, their boots hitting the floor with sharp, even rhythm. Linda stiffened as they approached, but her expression did not soften. Instead, she glared at me again with that piercing contempt that had shadowed my life for over a decade. The MPs positioned themselves on either side of her, and for the first time, her posture faltered. She looked around, realizing the magnitude of what she had done and the number of witnesses who had seen it. Evan lowered his phone slightly, his grin fading as the reality of military discipline pressed into the moment. The crowd remained silent, watching as the MPs guided Linda backward, insisting she step aside. My hands trembled, but I kept them at my sides the way I had been trained. I forced my breathing steady, focusing on the cool air filling my lungs. My cheek burned beneath the overhead lights, and the sting traveled down into my chest, making it hard to tell where the slap ended and the humiliation began. Every instinct in me wanted to break, run, hide, collapse, but the part of me shaped by OCS held firm. I told myself that officers did not crumble under pressure, and this was pressure unlike anything I had known. As Linda was escorted toward the back of the hall, I lifted my chin just slightly, a small motion, but the only strength I could muster in that moment. I watched Evan scramble after her, still clutching his phone, but no longer recording. The hall remained filled with an uneasy stillness, as if everyone were holding their breath, waiting for something to restore order to the fractured ceremony. I inhaled deeply, trying to reclaim the moment that had been ripped from me. But nothing about it felt like mine anymore. If you were in that hall, what would you do? Comment your state. For several long seconds after the MPs escorted Linda toward the back of the hall, the room remained frozen, as if no one dared breathe until someone with enough authority told them what to feel. The sting on my cheek pulsed in slow, sharp waves, and I could still see Evan's fading grin burned into my mind like a bruise that had not yet formed. My vision trembled, but I kept my chin lifted, refusing to bow beneath the weight of humiliation pressing against me from every direction. Then Major General Hampton stepped out from his seat. It was not simply the act of standing that caught the attention of the hall, but the way he moved with a deliberate, measured command that made every officer candidate straighten instinctively. His dress uniform seemed to draw light toward it, the silver stars on his shoulders, steady and unmistakable. When he reached the center of the aisle, he turned to face the hall, and the murmurs died instantly. It felt as though the air itself tightened, waiting for his judgment. "No soldier stands alone," he said, voice resonant enough that it filled the hall without effort. "And no one disgraces this ceremony." The sentence rolled through the room with the force of a declaration, not just for the moment, but for every tradition the ceremony represented. Chairs stopped shifting. Breaths halted mid-exhale. Even the MPs who had paused near the back seemed to stand a little straighter. I could not move. I felt the words settle over me, heavy but steady like armor. In that instant, the humiliation that had threatened to consume me faltered, replaced by something else, something like being seen. Major General Hampton turned toward me, and his expression softened, but only slightly enough to show that his anger was not aimed at me, but at the violation of the ceremony, the attack on a soldier in uniform, the deep insult delivered in front of an entire hall. He stepped closer, closing the distance between us in slow, deliberate strides. When he reached me, he placed one hand gently on my shoulder, the gesture firm enough to ground me, yet careful enough not to jar the raw ache still burning across my cheek. "You earned this," he said in a low, steady tone meant only for me. "Hold your head high." Something in my chest tightened so sharply I had to inhale slowly to keep my breath even. His hand remained on my shoulder for a brief anchoring moment, then he turned back to the podium, signaling the ceremony should resume. Behind us, the MPs continued escorting Linda toward the exit. I saw her glance back once, her face a mixture of outrage and disbelief, as if she still could not understand why the room had not taken her side. Evan trailed behind her, his earlier bravado drained, replaced by a stiff, awkward tension. They disappeared through the door, and it closed behind them with a soft but definitive thud. The hall exhaled collectively, though no one made a sound. Whatever shock had held us all in place had now shifted into something else, a shared, quiet acknowledgement that something significant had unfolded. I tried to focus on the front of the hall again, tried to reclaim the ceremony that had slipped through my fingers. My heartbeat still thudded unevenly in my chest, but the pressure felt different now, steadier somehow, as if the general's words had created a wall around me. The announcer hesitated briefly, then returned to his microphone, clearing his throat. "The ceremony will continue," he said. His voice wobbled just slightly, betraying the tension still lingering through the room. As he spoke, I caught the sound of hushed whispers spreading across nearby rows. People had witnessed something unforgettable, and their reactions moved like soft ripples through the hall. A woman leaned toward her husband, her eyes wide. "I cannot believe she did that," she whispered. Another man whispered, "I hope someone recorded it because command needs to see this." Part of me wanted to shrink under their attention, but another part wanted desperately to stand taller to show that Linda's slap would not define who I was becoming. When the announcer called another name and the next candidate stepped forward, the ceremony slowly regained a sense of rhythm, though the earlier shock still lingered in the air like the fading echo of a storm. I stood quietly waiting for direction, my breathing steadier now, but my thoughts racing. Unexpectedly, one of the MPs returned, stepping near the aisle before signaling discreetly to another staff member. They exchanged a quick whisper, and I saw the MP hold up a phone screen. It took me a moment to understand. Someone had already recorded the incident, and the video was spreading fast. Even from a distance, I recognized the angle. It was Evan's livestream clip, the one he had proudly broadcast seconds before everything spiraled out of his control. Now, without his smirking commentary, it exposed exactly what Linda had done in full clarity. The MP raised his brows slightly as he watched the replay, then whispered something I could not hear before slipping the phone into his pocket. Word travels fast in a military base, especially inside training environments where group chats operate like wildfire. I knew it would take minutes, maybe less, before nearly every candidate in the building had seen Linda striking me, before my rank was even pinned. Shame prickled at my skin again, but I pushed it down. This was no longer just my humiliation. It was something larger, something the base itself had witnessed. As I waited, I felt a subtle shift inside me, the unfamiliar sensation of support pressing against the edges of my isolation. It did not erase the pain on my cheek or the memory of Linda's rage, but it steadied me long enough for the general's words to echo again in my mind. No soldier stands alone. I let the sentence settle deep into the place where my old doubts used to live. Maybe for the first time in my life it felt true. I stood a little straighter, trying to believe I belonged in the uniform I wore, and trying to trust that the moment which had nearly broken me might become the very thing that proved I would not break at all. By the time the ceremony ended and we were dismissed from the hall, my cheek had faded from stinging heat to a steady, dull throb, but the humiliation still pulsed sharp in my chest. I tried to breathe through it as I stepped outside into the bright Georgia afternoon, hoping the sunlight might burn some of the memory away. Instead, the first thing I saw was a cluster of candidates staring down at their phones, whispering to each other in clipped, astonished tones. One of them glanced up at me with a mixture of sympathy and disbelief before lowering his voice again. I did not have to ask what they were looking at. I knew. Evan's video. The one he had live-streamed with the intention of mocking me had captured everything with painful clarity. The slap, the scream, the moment the entire hall recoiled, and Major General Hampton stepping forward like a thunderbolt. As I walked towards the barracks, the notifications on my own phone vibrated non-stop. At first, I ignored them. I did not want to see the video or read the comments or relive the moment again. But the vibrations kept coming buzzing against my leg like a heartbeat out of rhythm. When I finally pulled the phone from my pocket, the screen lit up with dozens of alerts from apps, group chats, and unknown numbers. A link appeared repeatedly sent by different candidates. Someone had already clipped the live stream and posted it on TikTok, where it was spreading faster than I could scroll. I hesitated, then tapped the video. There I was, walking toward the stage, my posture straight, my expression focused. Then Linda standing abruptly, her voice slicing through the audio. "My son Evan deserves this more than you. You stole his chance." The commenters had already descended. "Who slaps their child in uniform? That woman should be ashamed. The girl handled it better than most adults would." Then another. "This is disrespect at the highest level. No wonder the general stepped in." And another. "That Major General did the right thing. Proud of him for defending her." My breath caught as more comments poured in. Most were from older viewers. Their profile pictures showed gray hair, military caps, American flags, front porch photos, grandchildren smiling on their laps. People who had lived longer, who understood discipline, respect, and the weight of service. People who saw the slap not just as a family dispute, but as a violation of something sacred. Then the video appeared again on Facebook, reposted in a group for veterans of the Southeast region. The caption read simply, "This happened today at Fort Moore." The thread beneath it grew by the minute. Fathers, mothers, retired officers, enlisted soldiers, grandparents. The outrage was immediate and fierce. She slapped her in uniform. No excuse for that. My heart aches for that young officer candidate. Someone call her command. I wondered how long it would take before the base leadership saw it. Maybe they already had. I locked my phone, but the screen lit up again almost instantly. Another flood of notifications came, this time from public pages I did not recognize. Linda had begun posting too. Her account was filled with long paragraphs claiming I had disrespected her first, that I had pushed her, that I had manipulated the situation in front of the general. One post read, "My stepdaughter is ungrateful and fake. She pretends to be a victim to get attention." Another said, "She lied her way into OCS. She always lies." I felt a slow burn build under my ribs. It was one thing for her to attack me in private or even in the hall, but watching her broadcast lies to thousands of strangers stirred a deeper wound. For a moment, I considered replying, defending myself, posting the truth. But the idea fizzled as quickly as it formed. Arguing online would only feed the chaos, and I had learned long ago that Linda thrived on conflict. Silence was a shield, and I needed every shield I could get right now. Still, the fallout grew. Word spread beyond social media. One of my fellow candidates jogged past me, breathless with excitement. "Callahan." "Did you see this?" he said, holding up his phone. "Columbus News just picked up the story." My stomach dropped. Local news. That meant more eyes, more opinions, more pressure. With a shaky exhale, I opened a browser and searched. It took only seconds for the headline to appear. "Incident at Fort Moore Pinning Ceremony under review." The article was short, clearly written quickly with limited information, but the attached video clip left no room for doubt. The reporter kept the tone neutral, but the footage spoke for itself. The slap, my stagger, the horrified murmurs, and Major General Hampton rising like someone forced to intervene in something deeply unacceptable. I felt heat rise to my face again, though this time it was not from shame, but from the overwhelming realization that this moment no longer belonged only to me. It had become something public, something visible, something that people outside the base were already forming strong opinions about. A group of candidates approached cautiously. One of them placed a careful hand on my arm. "Callahan, we are here if you need anything," she said gently. "Some of us saw the whole thing. You did nothing wrong." I nodded, grateful but still shaky. It was strange to feel seen in such a vulnerable moment. Stranger still to realize that strangers online were defending me with a kind of fierce protectiveness I had never known from my own family. On my way back to my room, the evening sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the walkway. The base felt different now, larger somehow, as if the weight of hundreds of eyes pressed down from beyond the gates. I knew this was only the beginning. Videos like this did not fade quietly. They spread, they evolved, and sometimes they exploded. As I stepped into my room, closing the door behind me, I already sensed that tomorrow would bring consequences I could not yet name. The fallout had begun, and there was no undoing any of it. That night in my barracks room, the base seemed quieter than usual, as if the weight of the day had flattened every sound. I sat on the edge of my bunk, still in partial uniform, because I could not bring myself to move. My cheek ached with a dull, lingering heat, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the rising tide inside me. Shame curled tightly in my stomach, pressing upward until breathing felt like work. Every time I blinked, I saw the moment replaying again and again. Linda standing the slap, the gasps, the camera pointed straight at me. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, trying to stop the memories, but the harder I tried, the more they pushed through. What hurt most was not the slap itself, but the sudden collapse of everything I thought I had built. Months of training, hours of pushing myself through exhaustion and fear, all so I could stand tall on pinning day. Yet one moment, one person, one voice from my past had shaken me to the core. The shame grew heavier. Maybe she was right. Maybe I did not belong here. Maybe no matter how far I ran, I would always carry the weight of her words. The thought cracked something deep and old inside me. A flashback struck without warning. I was 14 again, standing in the hallway of our house in Savannah, clutching a report card with straight A's. Linda snatched it from my hand, barely glancing before saying, "Grades do not matter when the person behind them is nothing special." My father had stood in the doorway, pretending not to hear. Another flash. I was 15, crying quietly in my room after Linda hid my new running shoes and told me privileges were earned and I had earned nothing. Her voice from the past and her voice in the hall today blurred together. "You only get this far by luck. Do not act like you earned anything." The words burrowed deep. I curled forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my breaths shallow and uneven. The idea of quitting whispered through me with terrifying softness. If I walked away now, the humiliation would stop. The comments, the stares, the endless replay of that video would fade. Maybe quitting would bring peace. But another voice rose beneath the fear and shame, quieter but steadier, the same voice that had pushed me through land nav, through ruck, marches, through sleepless nights. "You came here to become someone she cannot break." Still, the doubt clung like wet fabric. I did not know how long I sat there before a knock sounded at my door. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but the knock came again, firm but not harsh. When I opened the door, Sergeant First Class Medina stood there, his expression steady but softer than usual. "Candidate Callahan," he said. "Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside. He scanned the room, noticing the untouched dinner tray, the wrinkled sheets, the way I kept twisting my hands together. "Sit," he said, and I obeyed out of habit, but also because my legs felt weak. "You had a hard day," he said after a long pause. There was no judgment in his voice, just truth. What happened was unacceptable, and leadership knows that. But I need you to listen carefully to what I am about to say. My throat tightened. He leaned forward slightly. "Do not let one moment undo months of grit. I have watched you push through things that break people twice your size." He paused, letting the words settle. "You belong here more than you think." I swallowed hard, unable to respond. SFC Medina continued. "Major General Hampton asked about you. He wants you to consider joining the leadership development track after pinning. My head lifted a little. The leadership development track was reserved for candidates who showed strong potential for future command roles, people who were noticed, people who mattered. I shook my head slightly. After today, I do not know if I can even face tomorrow. Medina studied me carefully. Precisely because of today, he said. Soldiers face challenges on and off the field. What you experienced was personal and public and painful, yet you stood your ground. That is leadership whether you see it or not. His words struck something inside me, something fragile, but still alive. Before he left, he placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. Rest tonight, Callahan. Tomorrow will be different. After he stepped out and the door closed behind him, I sat in silence again, though something in the room felt less suffocating. The shame did not disappear, but it shifted just enough for a sliver of clarity to push through. Later that evening, another unexpected knock came. When I opened the door this time, Major General Hampton himself stood there. My heart jolted and I snapped to attention instinctively. At ease, he said gently. I stepped back, letting him in unsure what to say. He regarded me with a measured calm that somehow made me feel both exposed and protected. Candidate Callahan, he began. You showed resilience today that cannot be taught. The ceremony was marred by something that should never have happened, but your response demonstrated control, grace, and discipline. His gaze held mine steady. I want you to consider that leadership development program. You have potential. I do not want to see wasted by fear or old wounds. I felt my breath catch. Sir, I said, my voice barely steady. I am not sure I deserve that. He shook his head. Do not measure your worth through the eyes of someone who tried to break you. Measure it by the way you stood today, even when the ground shook beneath you. His words cracked open something I had buried for years. The belief that maybe I could rise, that maybe Linda's grip on my identity was finally weakening. When he left, I sat on my bunk and let the silence settle again, though it felt different now, edged with possibility, rather than despair. The leadership track was more than an opportunity. It was a chance to rewrite the story Linda had tried to script for me since childhood, a chance to stand taller than the past that had tried to confine me. For the first time since the ceremony, a small, steady flame warmed inside me. Maybe tomorrow really could be different. For a brief moment after Major General Hampton spoke to me, I allowed myself to believe the worst was behind me. The ceremony was over, the shock was settling, and I thought the chaos might finally quiet down long enough for me to breathe. But I underestimated Linda. I underestimated how far she would go to twist a story, even with hundreds of witnesses and a clear video of what she had done. The first sign of the counterattack came the next morning when an administrative NCO knocked on my door before sunrise. Candidate Callahan report to the company office immediately. His tone was neutral but clipped the way people speak when they know news is bad but cannot show it. I dressed quickly, forcing my hands to steady as I tightened my boots. The walk to the company building felt longer than usual, the damp Georgia air settling heavy on my shoulders. When I stepped inside the company office, 2 officers were waiting with unreadable expressions. One of them held a printed memo. The other gestured for me to sit. Candidate Callahan, we need your account of the incident yesterday. Someone has filed a formal complaint. My throat tightened. I knew instantly who. Linda. But hearing it spoken aloud made something inside me sink. Sir, I said carefully, I have already provided an initial verbal statement. This is something different, he replied. The complaint alleges that you initiated physical contact with your stepmother before she reacted. My pulse kicked sharply. That is not true, I said quickly. Too quickly, maybe. He nodded slightly, but his expression did not change. We still require a formal written statement. The Inspector General office was notified early this morning. That was when the real weight hit me. The IG. That meant an investigation, documentation, interviews, a full process that would follow me through every step. Linda had not simply lashed out in anger. She had taken her attack into official channels. My stomach twisted as the officer slid a packet toward me. Provide as much detail as possible, and be aware that additional evidence has been submitted. Additional evidence. The phrase echoed like static in my head. I knew exactly what it meant before he said the next part. A video clip was provided by your stepbrother Evan, a version different from the one circulating online. My jaw tightened. Evan had always been clever in the worst ways. I could already imagine how he had edited the footage, cutting the part where Linda screamed, cutting the part where she rose, cutting the slap, leaving only my startled step backward, maybe making it look as if I had approached aggressively. It was the kind of manipulation he excelled at, the officer continued. For now, this is simply a request for information, not a disciplinary action, but you must take it seriously. Do you understand? I nodded, even though my mind felt distant as if I were watching myself from a few feet away. Yes, sir. Dismissed. I stepped outside and the warm air hit me like a wave, but instead of grounding me, it only amplified the tightness in my chest. As I walked back toward the barracks, my phone buzzed repeatedly with new notifications. I ignored them until one came from a number I recognized. My father. For a brief second, hope flickered, the kind of hope I should have learned to stop feeding. Maybe he was calling to say he had seen the videos, that he knew Linda was lying, that he finally believed me. Instead, it was a text. You need to calm down. Your stepmother is upset. She says you hit her arm when you passed. Evan has the video. We are only trying to help you before this becomes serious. The message blurred as tears welled in my eyes. He still did not see me. Even with everything laid out in plain sight, he still chose her. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I knew any response would be pointless. My father was not looking for truth. He was looking for the version of events that allowed him to avoid conflict. He had always chosen the easiest path even when the cost was me. I put the phone away and kept walking. I needed to speak to someone who could give me direction, not despair. I found SFC Medina outside the training building reviewing paperwork. He looked up immediately, his eyes narrowing just enough to tell me he could read everything on my face. What happened? I handed him the memo. His jaw clenched, but he spoke calmly. This is not unusual when families bring their issues onto the installation, he said. Do not panic. Tell the truth clearly and completely, but first, breathe. I forced a long breath into my lungs, though it felt jagged and thin. Sir Evan sent an edited video. They are saying I hit her. Medina nodded slowly. That will not hold once the real footage circulates in official channels. The general saw everything. Many instructors did too. But you must still give your statement. He paused, studying me. This is not just about yesterday, is it? A lump rose in my throat. No, Sergeant, I whispered. It felt like my whole childhood was dragging itself back up, pressing against my ribs. Every lie Linda had ever told, every time my father had believed her, every moment I had been forced to stand silent. This investigation felt like a test, not of what happened in the hall, but of whether I could stand against the version of reality Linda always tried to impose. Medina placed a steady hand on my shoulder. You can handle this. You have already handled worse. His words steadied something inside me, but only slightly. I still felt the tremor beneath my ribs, the old familiar fear that Linda would twist the truth until even I questioned it. Later that afternoon, an official email arrived instructing me to submit a written statement by the end of the day. The message was clear, thorough, and formal, leaving no space for delay. As I stared at the blank document on my screen, the gravity of the moment settled on me. This was not training. This was not a drill. This was the real test, not of my endurance or physical strength, but of whether I could confront my past head-on without letting it break me again. I straightened my back, wiped my face with the sleeve of my uniform, and began typing the truth as clearly as I could. The truth I had never been allowed to speak loudly before. The truth Linda had spent years trying to erase. This time, I would not let her. By the next morning, the weight of the investigation pressed on every step I took. The sun had barely risen over Fort Moore, yet the air already felt heavy, thick with the tension of what the day would bring. I walked toward the administrative building with my written statement folded neatly inside a manila envelope, my hands sweating against the edges. I had read it 3 times the night before, making sure every detail was accurate, clear, and free of emotion, even though emotion was knotted through every word. When I submitted it, the officer receiving the documents skimmed the first page, nodded once, and said the Inspector General will review this along with additional material. You may be asked to provide further clarification. Dismissed. I thanked him and stepped outside, grateful for the open air, even though my lungs still felt tight. I expected the anxiety to worsen as the day continued, but something changed by midday. Something that surprised me so completely that for a moment I wondered if I had heard correctly. An administrative NCO approached me after lunch, his expression more open than earlier. Callahan the General has authorized you to submit witness names for the record. My posture straightened instinctively. Witnesses. That meant my statement would not stand alone. That meant someone believed me, believed enough to verify my account instead of letting Linda and Evan control the narrative. The NCO handed me a small form. Provide anyone who saw the incident clearly. The names you trust. I held the form carefully, feeling the significance of the moment. For years, any conflict with Linda had always spiraled into her word against mine, with my father accepting her version before I even finished a sentence. But here in this system, one built on structure, accountability, and clarity, the truth had a chance to breathe. I wrote the first name without hesitation. Officer Candidate Harris. Harris had been standing only a few feet behind me when Linda rose from her chair. She had seen everything, the scream, the slap, the shock that followed. I added Officer Candidate Reyes and Officer Candidate Morgan, both of whom were in direct view of the aisle. Then the next name came even easier. Sergeant First Class Medina. He had not only witnessed part of the chaos, but had seen the aftermath in my eyes, the way I struggled to hold myself steady. And finally, I listed the name I hoped would make the greatest difference. First Lieutenant Cameron. He had been seated close enough to catch the full scene from start to finish, a calm presence with a reputation for integrity. I turned in the form and waited. The hours passed slowly, thick with anticipation. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt my pulse spike, but the notifications were mostly from group chats sharing news about field training schedules or sending memes to lighten the tension surrounding the base. Then, around late afternoon, I received an email from the IG office requesting a short meeting. The message asked me to arrive alone. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to steady my breathing, reminding myself of Medina's words. You can handle this. When I entered the small interview room, an IG investigator sat behind a simple desk reviewing a set of printed pages. He did not look up immediately as he spoke. We have received multiple witness accounts confirming that your stepmother initiated physical contact before any movement on your part. My breath caught. Confirming. It was the first solid sign that the truth was being recognized. The investigator gestured toward the papers. These statements align consistently with your written account. In addition, Sergeant First Class Medina corroborated your behavior before and after the incident. He finally looked up, meeting my eyes with a steady calm. This is helpful for the case. I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. Thank you, sir. He continued. There is one more development. A video was submitted by your stepbrother, but upon review it appears altered. However, during our evidence request, another version was accidentally provided. I frowned. Another version? He nodded. The original uncut file was uploaded through an automatic cloud backup linked to his account. It was time-stamped before the edited version. The words sank in slowly, then hit with full force. Evan had accidentally exposed the truth. His own system had betrayed him. The investigator tapped the desk lightly. The original video shows no contact initiated by you. It shows your stepmother rising, shouting, and striking you without provocation. The clarity is unmistakable. Relief washed through me so intensely, I had to grip the arm of the chair to anchor myself. For the first time in days, the knot in my chest loosened enough for air to rush in fully. The investigator continued. We will compile all evidence and send a report to the commanding officers for final determination. You may be contacted again, but at this stage the case is leaning in your favor. Leaning in my favor. I had never heard those words in relation to conflict with Linda. In my childhood, every argument, every accusation, every moment of tension had turned into another wound, another point scored against me without a chance to defend myself. But here, in this controlled environment, where truth did not depend on manipulation or favoritism, something finally aligned. When I left the office, the sky over Fort Moore was streaked with late afternoon gold casting long shadows across the training fields. The air felt lighter than it had in days, as though the weight that had been crushing my ribs had cracked open. As I walked across the grounds, a few candidates nodded to me with quiet, supportive glances. They did not need to say anything. Their eyes said enough. They had seen the video, they had heard the whispers, and now they knew the truth. That night I sat on my bunk replaying everything in my mind, the slap, the investigation, the steady way truth had begun piecing itself together. For once, the echo of Linda's voice did not drown out my own. For once, it was her story unraveling, not mine. The truth had finally found daylight, and I could feel something inside me shifting, something long buried beginning to rise. The IG meeting should have brought me peace. But by the next morning, a different kind of storm had already begun swirling beyond the gates of Fort Moore, a storm I had not prepared for. My phone buzzed nonstop, though I refused to open most notifications. I told myself staying focused was part of maintaining composure, yet every vibration reminded me that the world outside had already seized the story. It started when Columbus News emailed me requesting an interview. The message was polite, formal, respectful. But still I stared at the screen with a tightening chest. They wanted to run a feature on what they called the Pinning Day incident and how I had stood my ground in uniform. My pulse thudded. My instinct said no. My training said no. My dignity said no. I replied with a brief statement thanking them for reaching out, but declining any interview to maintain professional standards during an ongoing review. I expected the matter to end there, but within hours, my story jumped from local whispers to a wider audience for reasons I did not anticipate. A retired Army journalist named Mark Whelan posted an article to a veteran-run publication called Honor Line Report. I had never heard of it, but apparently thousands of older service members across the country followed it every day. The headline struck me like a chord. A young officer stood in dignity, even when slapped by her own stepmother. I reread the words twice, feeling the surreal weight of seeing my humiliation framed not as weakness but as resilience. The article did not mention my name, nor Fort Moore, nor any identifying details. It described the moment only in broad strokes, protecting OPSEC and respecting boundaries. But the emotional truth of it was unmistakable. The phrasing held the quiet reverence of someone who had seen service from every angle. Triumph, burden, pain, and endurance. His words painted the scene not as gossip, but as a moment of fractured ceremony transformed into a testament of perseverance. He wrote about what it meant for a candidate to hold steady when their world cracked in front of a crowd, and about how anyone who had ever stood in uniform knew the gravity of that restraint. The comment section exploded. Veterans from Vietnam, Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan posted responses within minutes, many condemning the act of any parent striking a service member in uniform. One wrote, "I have seen soldiers under fire show less composure than that young woman." Another said, "If someone slapped my kid while they were wearing the flag, I would lose my mind." Someone else added, "That general did what any leader of character should do, stand by your people." As the article spread across forums, Facebook groups, and veteran messaging boards, the attention snowballed. People began speculating about the identities involved, though no one had enough facts to name anyone. That anonymity should have protected my family, but instead it only fueled online detectives who searched social media for clues. Eventually, Evan's video, which he had posted lightly on his personal page before removing it, was dug up through screen recordings. Once it resurfaced, everything ignited again, except now the narrative was completely out of his control. Linda's face, her expression, her raised hand, the sharp crack of the slap, all froze in a single frame that had begun circulating on military discussion pages. Though blurry, it was unmistakable what had happened. And the comments were brutal. Who slaps their own kid in uniform? She should be ashamed of herself. National disgrace. I scrolled through the remarks feeling a mix of disbelief, relief, and fear. Relief because the truth had finally reached the public unfiltered. Fear because I knew Linda. She did not handle shame with accountability. She handled it with rage. I turned off my phone, but the story refused to stay silent. During evening chow, several candidates approached me with cautious, supportive nods. One whispered, "You did good, Callahan." Another simply said, "She had no right." Their words warmed something inside my chest that had felt cold for years. But I also felt exposed under a spotlight I never asked for. And when I returned to the barracks, I found an email forwarded by our company training NCO. It was a copy of the Honor Line Report article marked for awareness only, with a note from Major General Hampton's office stating that discussions around the incident had escalated beyond the installation. The email reassured us that the chain of command was committed to protecting officer candidates from undue public pressure or outside interference. Seeing his name in the message anchored my breath. He was watching. He was still standing by what he had witnessed. That should have comforted me, yet I sensed an undercurrent shifting. Linda was not someone who faded when cornered. She lashed out. She weaponized perception. Now that the world saw her as the villain, she would not retreat quietly. I tried to sleep, but the thin barracks mattress felt too firm and the air too loud with echoes of past arguments. I remembered being 12, hearing her tell my father that I was dramatic, that I cried to manipulate him. I remembered being 15 when she slapped me for spilling juice and then told neighbors I had thrown it at her. The lies had always spread faster than the truth. Except this time, the truth had gone viral first. By morning, a new wave of comments surged online. Someone had stitched Evan's original video with the veteran article caption reading, "Proof of the slap." The post went viral within hours, especially in communities of older Americans who felt protective of military ceremony. The words, "national disgrace," appeared again and again. I stared at the phrase, feeling its full gravity. National disgrace. They were not talking about me. They were talking about her. For once, the shame belonged to the one who caused it. Yet the victory felt fragile, like a glass trophy balanced on a ledge. One shove from Linda and it could shatter. As I walked to formation, several soldiers saluted me with subtle respect. Not pity, not curiosity, but genuine recognition. The kind that said we saw what happened and we know what it took to stay steady. For the first time since the slap, I felt the faintest stirrings of power returning to my own narrative, not because I fought for public attention, but because dignity, when witnessed, had a way of speaking louder than lies. And as the sun rose over Fort Moore, staining the sky a pale gold, I realized that this moment was not the end of exposure. It was only the beginning. By the time the sun dipped low over Fort Moore, I thought the day would finally settle into something resembling quiet, but quiet was never something Linda allowed. I had just left the company office when my phone buzzed violently in my pocket, not with a message, but with a notification from base security. "Candidate Callahan, report to Gate 6 immediately. Urgent." My heart dropped into my stomach. Gate 6 was the lesser-used access point near the back where civilian traffic rarely lingered. For security to call me there meant something had already gone too far. When I arrived, the scene unfolded like a twisted memory. Someone I thought I had finally outrun waiting for me just beyond the chain-link boundary. Linda stood on the civilian side of the gate, gripping the bars with both hands, her eyes wild, her hair disheveled, her breath visible in the slanted evening light. The security sergeant nodded toward her. "She says she needs to speak with you, ma'am, and she refuses to leave until you acknowledge her." I inhaled slowly, feeling every muscle in my back tighten. For a second, memories surged too fast to control every insult, every slap, every moment she twisted truth into something unrecognizable. I stepped forward, stopping just close enough for her to see the steadiness in my posture. She gasped as if seeing me in uniform was some kind of personal attack. "Brooke, please listen to me." Her voice cracked in a way I had never heard, not even in the worst arguments. She pressed her hands together in a pleading gesture. "You have to get that video removed. The articles, the comments, they are destroying my life." She reached through the bars as if expecting me to take her hand. "You have to fix this. You can fix this." My jaw tightened. I had spent most of my life cleaning the messes she created, believing that if I was quiet enough, obedient enough, invisible enough, I could avoid becoming her next target. But that girl was gone. I asked evenly, "What exactly do you think I can fix?" She blinked, tears forming. "The video, the posts, all those people calling me horrible things. They don't know me. They don't know the truth. I almost laughed at the irony, but the sound curdled in my throat. The truth. The truth was a foreign language to her. She pressed on, her voice fast, desperate. I only wanted the best for you. I always did. If you could just tell them that, if you could tell them your stepmother isn't this monster they are making me out to be, it would all go away. Please, Brooke. Please. For the first time, she sounded like she needed me, and the realization tasted metallic. This was not remorse. This was survival. She wasn't here because she regretted what she did. She was here because for the first time in her life she had lost control of the narrative, and she wanted it back. I kept my tone level. So you came to the base. You trespassed on military property to demand I protect you from consequences you created. She flinched at the word consequences. Brooke, you don't understand. I could lose my job, my reputation, my friends, everything. They think I attacked you. They think I'm abusive. My voice hardened. You did attack me. You have always been abusive. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if the words had stunned her. No, I was trying to help you. I had to be tough with you. You were difficult, always difficult. If I didn't guide you, you would have ended up nothing. A lost cause. I felt a heat rise in my chest. Not anger exactly, but clarity. Bright, sharp, liberating. I stepped closer, letting the guard hear every word. You were never guiding me. You were breaking me because you liked what it felt like to watch me struggle. Her eyes widened, then trembled. Brooke, that is not fair. I was doing my best. You were always so sensitive, so ungrateful. You owe me for everything I sacrificed. Sacrificed. The word echoed like a punch. She had never sacrificed anything except my self-worth, and now she wanted repayment. I shook my head slowly. No, Linda, I don't owe you anything. She reached out again, voice rising. Brooke, please. People are calling me a national disgrace. Do you know how humiliating that is? I swallowed, steady and calm. Finally! She jerked her hand back as if I had slapped her. Her voice broke again. I am your mother. Help me. Something inside me snapped, but not in pain, in recognition of the truth I had denied for years. I met her gaze, cold, unblinking. You were never my mother. The air between us went completely still. The security sergeant shifted uncomfortably, stepping forward to reinforce distance. Linda stared at me as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her face twisted first in disbelief, then in wounded pride, then in indignation. She spat out, You ungrateful little nothing. After everything I did for you. You think you are better than me now just because you put on that uniform. My voice stayed even. No, I'm better than the person you raised me to believe I was. She opened her mouth again, but the sergeant stepped between us. Ma'am, you need to leave now. She ignored him, still focused on me. Brooke, please, they are tearing me apart online. I can't live like this. Tell them you lied. Tell them you provoked me. Tell them the video doesn't show the full story. Something in me crystallized at that moment. Even now, even cornered, even exposed, she still expected me to rewrite reality to save her. I straightened my posture. I will not lie for you. The sergeant motioned to the other guard, who stepped forward firmly. Ma'am, leave, or you will be cited for harassment of military personnel. She looked between us, rage and desperation mingling in her eyes. Then her face contorted in a broken scream. This isn't over, Brooke. You hear me. This will never be over. But her voice faded as the guards escorted her away down the long stretch of pavement, until all I could hear was the quiet hum of passing traffic and my own heartbeat steady, confident, lighter than it had felt in years. For the first time, I understood fully what it meant to reclaim my power. And for the first time, she understood she no longer had any. The official decision arrived 3 days after Linda showed up at Gate 6, and the moment I saw the subject line from the Inspector General office, my breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Determination report enclosed. For a full minute I could not bring myself to open it. I stood alone in the hallway outside the company office, the polished floor reflecting the overhead lights, the faint scent of boot polish and cleaning solution making the air feel sharper than usual. When I finally tapped the email, the words blurred before sharpening slowly, clarity forming like ice beneath still water. The investigation concludes that Officer Candidate Brooke Callahan acted appropriately and within all standards of military conduct. Evidence confirms that the civilian individual identified as Linda Miller initiated physical contact and engaged in disruptive behavior during a protected ceremony. The civilian individual committed trespass and harassment on a federal installation. Recommended action immediate, 12-month access restriction. I exhaled so deeply my knees nearly gave out. I read it again, just to feel the weight of it settle into my bones. For years, truth had always felt fragile in my hands, something easily crushed or rewritten by louder voices. But here in this statement it stood solid, undeniable, documented. They believed me. No, they did more than believe me. They validated what happened with evidence, with procedure, with authority. I thought the relief would come like a storm breaking, but instead it washed through me slowly, almost tender a warmth spreading into the cold corners that had been there since childhood. Not even 30 minutes passed before the company commander called me into his office. He was composed, but I saw respect soften his expression when he said, "The IG findings have been reviewed by command. The access ban is already in effect. She will not be allowed within 500 feet of any gate or any military function." I nodded, keeping my posture straight, even though inside I felt like collapsing from the weight suddenly lifting. "There is more," he continued. "Your stepbrother Evan is being referred to civilian authorities for knowingly distributing falsified material aimed at damaging the reputation of a service member during a federal ceremony." My eyebrows rose slightly. Even though I knew what he had done, the official consequences startled me. The commander leaned back. His altered video created confusion during the initial hours of the investigation. The original file recovered from his backups proved intent to deceive. "There are penalties for that," I whispered. "Yes, sir," not knowing what else to say. He dismissed me with a firm nod and something almost like encouragement in his voice. "You handled yourself well, Candidate Callahan. It matters." When I stepped back into the sunlight outside the office, it felt different. Warmer somehow, as though the sky itself acknowledged that something long overdue had finally been set right. But justice, even when delivered cleanly, leaves echoes. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again, but this time the name at the top made my heart sink. Dad. I almost did not answer. For months, his silence had spoken louder than words. But guilt tugged at something inside me, a leftover instinct from childhood, so I swiped to accept. "Brooke," his voice was strained thinner than I remembered. "Honey, can we talk?" I swallowed, keeping my tone neutral. "About what?" He hesitated a breath too long. "About your stepmother. About everything that has been said about her online." I closed my eyes for one long, controlled second. Dad, the IG office issued an official decision. She attacked me. She trespassed. She lied. He exhaled sharply as though my clarity wounded him. I know, but she says things got out of hand. She says if you just speak to her, tell people it was a misunderstanding, it will calm everything down." There it was again, the same old cycle, the same attempt to twist my stability into her shield. For a moment, I almost slipped back into that familiar role, but something inside me resisted rising like steel. I kept my voice steady. "Dad, I will not rewrite the truth to protect her from consequences." His voice wavered. "She is miserable, Brooke. She can't leave the house. People are calling her names. The shame is unbearable." A strange quiet fell over me. Shame. The same shame she had poured onto me for years. The same shame she tried to inflict on me in front of hundreds of soldiers. I said quietly, "Then maybe she finally understands what she has done." He inhaled shakily. "Brooke, please. She needs you." I felt no anger, only clarity, smooth and cold. She needed me to cover for her, not to heal. And he needed me to return to the role that had kept our house functioning. But I was not that girl anymore. "No, Dad. I won't meet her." I won't lie, and I won't carry her burdens anymore." Silence filled the line so dense it felt physical. Then he whispered, "I don't know how we got here." I answered honestly, "Years of choices, not mine." His breath trembled, then faded into the faint hum of static before he finally said, "I hope one day you understand." The call ended, and I watched my reflection in the dark screen. For the first time, I saw not the scared daughter trying to earn approval, but a woman standing firmly on her own ground. That evening after chow, I walked across the training field while candidates jogged laps and cadres barked instructions in the distance. The smell of grass and dust settled around me, the familiar rhythm of Fort Moore humming like a heartbeat. I felt lighter, clearer, almost reborn. Justice had not erased the humiliation nor healed every wound, but it had done something just as powerful. It had drawn a boundary carved in stone, a line between the person I had been trained to become and the person I once was forced to be. And as the sky deepened into evening, I whispered the words that felt like a closing chapter. "If you believe Brooke deserved justice, tap the like button." Then I breathed in the cool night air and allowed myself to feel something I had not felt in years, peace. When the IG decision settled into the rhythm of daily life at Fort Moore, I expected things to quiet down, but instead, something shifted in a direction I never imagined. 2 days after the report finalized, I received a message instructing me to report to the brigade headquarters for a meeting. No details, no explanation. The kind of message that makes your breath hitch because you know it could change everything. I walked across the parade field feeling the weight of my boots, the warm Georgia air settling against my skin in a way that felt grounding, steadying. When I stepped into the building, Major General Hampton himself stood near the conference table reviewing a folder thick with documents. For a moment, I hesitated at the doorway, unsure if I should interrupt. But he looked up immediately and motioned me in with a firm yet encouraging nod. "Candidate Callahan at ease," he said. I stood before him, hands loosely behind my back, trying to calm the pulse hammering beneath my uniform. He opened the folder and for a long moment studied its contents before speaking. "You have demonstrated resilience, integrity, and composure under pressure in ways most officers do not face so early in their careers." His eyes lifted to mine, steady, grounded. "We need leaders who can stand steady in chaos. You have already shown you can." I blinked, not fully trusting that I was hearing what I thought I was hearing. Then he slid a single sheet across the table. "This," he said, "is my formal recommendation for you to enter the leadership development track. It is a competitive path, one that shapes officers for long-term command potential. You will be challenged, but you are ready." My throat tightened with a kind of disbelief that bordered on awe. For weeks, I had fought to keep my footing against the weight of my family's cruelty. Yet here was the commanding general of the installation offering not pity, not protection, but opportunity. "Sir," I managed quietly, "I do not know what to say." He gave a faint, almost fatherly smile. "Say yes, and keep earning it." When I stepped out of the building, clutching the packet, the sunlight hit differently brighter, perhaps. Or maybe it was simply that something in me had begun to shift. For so long, I had walked with the shadow of Linda's voice clinging to my shoulders. Now the wind felt lighter on my skin, as if the weight had finally begun to fall away. Over the next weeks, my schedule changed, and I was assigned new duties, responsibilities, and mentorship sessions with senior officers who challenged me in ways that felt exhilarating instead of crushing. I learned to build confidence not from defiance, but from competence, from clarity, from the understanding that I was capable, and that capability did not need to be proven to anyone who refused to see it. With the new path came another decision, one I knew was inevitable. I moved out of the shared barracks and into a small apartment on the quiet side of Columbus, a 15-minute drive from Fort Moore, tucked beneath tall pines and warm southern sunsets. It was simple, one bedroom, one kitchen with old hardwood floors and windows that caught the afternoon light perfectly. But it felt like the first space in my life that belonged only to me. No shouting, no closed doors, no footsteps approaching with unpredictable tempers. Just air, just peace, just the hum of a new beginning. Unpacking was slow, deliberate. I kept only what mattered: uniforms, boots, books, awards, letters from instructors. Everything tying me to my family stayed behind. even the photographs, especially the photographs. I realized I did not need proof of where I came from to know where I was going. For a while, my father tried reaching out, leaving short, fragmented messages on my phone. Brooke, please call me. We can fix this. Brooke, I miss you. Brooke, your stepmother is struggling. Each message felt like someone tapping at a locked door on a house I no longer lived in. I did not respond. I wished him well, silently wished that he might someday understand, but I no longer carried the responsibility of patching the holes he refused to repair. Healing is not a single moment. It is a pattern, a choice repeated until it becomes a truth. Mine began with simple things. Jogging along the river at sunrise, brewing coffee in the quiet of my own kitchen, sitting on my balcony as dusk settled over the trees, feeling breath ease into my lungs without a single voice tearing into the stillness. And each day, I felt myself growing into someone I had always hoped to be, but never believed I could become someone who had stepped out from under a shadow and found herself standing in full sunlight. One evening, as I stood outside after a long training day watching the colors fade across the horizon, I felt a quiet realization settle into my chest. Not heavy, but warm. I had lost a family, but I had gained something far greater. I had gained clarity, freedom, and a sense of honor that had nothing to do with their approval and everything to do with my own truth. My voice whispered the words not to anyone else but to the wind itself, as if sealing a chapter with quiet finality. I lost a family, but I found the honor I deserved. Then, with a small breath, steady and sure, I turned back toward my apartment, ready to build the life that finally belonged to me. Tell me your city, where are you watching from? If you want more stories like this, subscribe and stay safe out there.